If you have owned a Chevy or GMC truck or sports car from the last decade, you have probably heard people complain about the 8-speed transmission. Some say it shifts rough, others say it vibrates on the highway. A lot of people say it fails way sooner than it should. Today we are going to talk about what is really going on with GM's 8-speed transmission. I am talking about the 8L90 and the 8L45. These are the units you find in the Silverado, Sierra, Tahoe, Suburban, Camaro, and even the Corvette. What is crazy is that this transmission was supposed to be a big improvement. GM designed it to be faster, smoother, and more fuel efficient than the old 6-speed units. On paper, the design looked impressive. Once these vehicles hit the real world, though, a lot of owners started noticing problems. The most common one is the famous shudder. The whole vehicle shakes at certain speeds, usually around 40 to 70 miles per hour on the highway. Some people describe it like driving over rumble strips, even though the road is perfectly smooth. On top of that, you get hard downshifts, weird hesitation, and eventually complete failure in some cases. And it became so common that GM had to deal with lawsuits over it. And hey, welcome to Auto V Fix, where we help you diagnose and fix your car problems in easy-to-follow steps. So how did this happen? Let's start from the beginning. GM introduced the 8-speed transmission as the next step forward. Before it came the 6L80 and the 6L90. Those 6 speeds were actually pretty decent. Not perfect, but strong enough for trucks and understood well by mechanics. They replaced the older 4-speed transmissions like the 4L60E. Once fuel economy rules started getting stricter, GM needed something with more gears. More gears means the engine can stay in the perfect RPM range more often. That means better mileage and better acceleration. The 8-speed delivered on paper. It had a wider gear ratio spread, which means the jumps between gears were smaller. That usually gives smoother shifting and less strain on the engine. GM also made the 8-speed lighter by using aluminum parts instead of heavier steel parts. The whole transmission lost about 15% of its weight. Inside, it used multiple planetary gear sets and more clutch packs than the older design. Technically, it was a complicated but impressive piece of engineering. The problem is that more complexity usually means more things that can go wrong, and that is exactly what happened. The biggest and most famous failure is the torque converter. Shudder. If you have ever felt it, you know what I mean. You are holding a steady speed. Light throttle, smooth highway, and out of nowhere, the vehicle starts to vibrate. Not violently, but enough to feel it through the seat, the pedals, and even the steering wheel. Some days you hardly notice it. Other days it feels like the whole truck is having a bad day. This happens because the torque converter clutch inside the transmission starts slipping in an unstable way. And the reason it slips comes down to the transmission fluid. When GM first released the 8-speed, they used a fluid that did not hold up well over time. All transmission fluids contain chemicals that control friction. They help the clutches engage smoothly. In this case, those chemicals would break down way sooner than they should. When the fluid is new, the friction behavior is stable. If the clutch starts to slip, the fluid helps it correct itself. But once the fluid ages and those friction modifiers wear out, the whole system flips. The clutch starts slipping more and the transmission computer tries to correct it, but it cannot because the fluid is no longer behaving the way it should. That is where the shudder begins. Many people notice that a complete fluid flush seemed to fix the problem temporarily. That is because fresh fluid restores the correct friction behavior. The shudder sometimes disappears instantly after a fluid change, but for a lot of people it comes right back after 1,000 or 2,000 miles, and once that happens, the torque converter itself usually needs to be replaced. Before we continue, do me a quick favor. If this video is helping you understand what is going on with your GM transmission, hit the like button, share this video with a friend who drives a Chevy or GMC, and make sure to subscribe to Auto V Fix. It really helps the channel grow and lets us keep making videos like this. Now, let us get back into it. GM eventually admitted that the original fluid was part of the problem. They sent out an official service bulletin telling dealers to replace the old fluid with a new Blue Label Mobile 1 fluid, also sold as AC Delco 10 9243. They made it clear that Dexron 6 was not to be used for this problem. The fix was supposed to include a full fluid exchange, a cooler flush, and a new filter. Many owners said their trucks felt perfect afterward. Others said the shudder came back almost immediately. Some people got lucky, some did not. But fluid is only one part of the story. The 8-speed transmission has other weak points that show up as it ages. One of those weak points is the torque converter itself. The lockup clutch inside the converter is not as strong as you would expect for a truck or a performance car. If you tow heavy loads or drive aggressively, that clutch gets hot and starts to wear out. Once it wears, the converter starts slipping more often. The friction surface can glaze or deform. In more severe cases, the converter can balloon. Ballooning is when pressure inside the converter builds up so much that the converter literally expands and pushes outward. When that happens, it can damage the flex plate or even the oil pump. And speaking of the oil pump, that is another issue. GM used a chain-driven pump system for this transmission. The pump sits low in the pan and pulls fluid up into the hydraulic circuits. When the transmission is clean and the fluid is fresh, the pump works fine. But when wear particles from a failing converter start circulating through the system, the pump begins to struggle. Pressure drops. Shifts become harsh or delayed. And if the pump fails completely, the entire transmission needs to be rebuilt. You also have the valve body and solenoids that can start acting up as debris builds inside the unit. And since the 8-speed relies on clutch-to-clutch shifting without bands, everything has to work perfectly. One worn clutch or one sticky valve, and the whole system starts to misbehave. When you add all of this together, you end up with a transmission that is advanced and efficient, but sensitive to fluid quality, sensitive to heat, and sensitive to wear. Some drivers never have a problem. Others go through converter after converter. The design works beautifully when everything is perfect. But the moment something falls out of balance, the problems show up fast. The good news is that GM has made improvements over the years. The later units tend to be more reliable. The updated fluid helps a lot. And if you own one of these vehicles, staying on top of maintenance is the key. Fluid changes with the correct Blue Label fluid are the best first step. If you still feel the shudder after that, the torque converter is usually the next thing that needs attention. The earlier you catch it, the less likely you are to damage the rest of the transmission. If you want a follow-up video where I explain the exact repair process, who should flush and who should replace the converter, how to identify early warning signs and what to look out for when buying a used GM with the 8-speed, let me know in the comments. Thanks for hanging out with me today on Auto V Fix. I appreciate you being here, and I will see you in the next one.